I was not weak. I was trained to give in. It was only when I studied Mineko Iwasaki's silent discipline that I understood why some vices never go away on their own. Iwasaki didn't fight against impulses. She dismantled them silently before they even appeared. Today, I'm going to show you why destroying an addiction doesn't start with willpower. It starts with invisible discipline. Stay with me until the end. A single adjustment can cut the addiction off at the root. The mistake I was making when trying to overcome my addictions. For a long time, I treated my addictions as external enemies. I saw them as invaders that had infiltrated my life, external forces that needed to be fought and destroyed through sheer willpower and relentless determination. When I caught myself giving in to addiction, whether it was food, screens, procrastination, self-destructive behaviors, it didn't matter which, I would enter a violent internal war, vowing that this time it would be different, that I would never do it again, that I would win once and for all. I made dramatic promises to myself, established rigid rules, created systems of punishment and reward, all based on the premise that addiction was a separate enemy from myself that needed to be dominated through stronger control and stricter discipline. Each relapse was treated as a lost battle in an ongoing war, and I would get up determined to fight harder next time, convinced that eventually my will would be strong enough to destroy the enemy once and for all. This war mentality created a devastating vicious cycle. The more I treated addictions as external enemies, the more internally divided I became. There was the good me who wanted to overcome the addiction, and the bad me who succumbed to it. And these two parts were in constant conflict, consuming massive energy. Every time I temporarily won through brute willpower, there was mounting tension, like damming water that will eventually overflow. And every time I lost and succumbed to the addiction, there was devastating shame and self-hatred that ironically made me seek more comfort in the very behavior I was trying to avoid. I was trapped in a loop of extreme restriction, followed by extreme indulgence, of fierce determination, followed by guilt-ridden collapse, of internal warfare that never produced lasting peace, only temporary armistices before the next battle. And the more I fought, the stronger they became within me. This was the most frustrating and confusing part. My intense effort seemed to feed exactly what I was trying to eliminate. The more rigidly I forbade myself from something, the more obsessively I thought about it. The more willpower I applied to resist the impulse, the stronger the impulse became when my willpower inevitably ran out. It was like trying not to think about a pink elephant. The act of trying not to think ensures you constantly think about it. My fight against addictions was giving them enormous attention and energy, keeping them alive and powerful at the center of my consciousness. I would wake up thinking, I won't give in today, spend the day actively resisting, and go to sleep either proud of having resisted or ashamed of having given in. But always, always with the addiction occupying central space in my mind and life. I also realized that this warlike approach created an all-or-nothing mentality that made relapses even more destructive. If I had won for 3 days and then relapsed once, I interpreted that as total failure that invalidated all previous progress. And once I had failed, I often went into, since I've already messed everything up, I'll just enjoy it mode, and turned a single slip-up into prolonged indulgence. There was no room for nuance, for recognizing incremental progress, for having compassion for the imperfect process of change. It was complete victory or total defeat, perfect abstinence or absolute failure. And this rigidity made failure not only probable but practically guaranteed, because no human being maintains absolute perfection indefinitely, especially when using only willpower as a tool. After years in this exhausting cycle of struggle and failure, I began to suspect that perhaps the problem wasn't that I wasn't fighting hard enough. Perhaps the problem was that I was fighting in the first place. Perhaps treating addictions as external enemies to be defeated through force was fundamentally the wrong approach, like using a hammer when you need a screwdriver. And that's when I discovered a completely different philosophy through studying the life of Mineko Iwasaki, a legendary geisha whose relationship with discipline was radically different from anything I had tried. She didn't fight impulses through brutal willpower. She transcended them through something far more subtle and infinitely more effective. An identity so strongly established that certain behaviors were simply no longer options that her mind considered. And this discovery would completely change my approach not only to addictions, but to the whole issue of self-discipline and personal transformation. Mineko Iwasaki and the discipline that nobody sees. In the life of a geisha, discipline is not a performance to impress others. It is an identity built silently over decades. Mineko Iwasaki, considered one of the most talented geishas in modern Japan, did not see discipline as something she did or practiced, occasionally when necessary. For her, discipline was literally who she was, woven so deeply into the fabric of her being that separating Mineko from her discipline would be like trying to separate water from moisture. It wasn't a mask she put on in the morning or a performance she activated when there was an audience. It was the invisible structure that underpinned every movement, every thought, every choice she made from the moment she woke up until the moment she fell asleep, and probably even in her dreams. Mineko didn't need to resist the urge to be undisciplined because she had trained so deeply and completely not to need that urge at all. This was the revelation that left me completely bewildered when I began studying her life and philosophy. While I expended monumental energy resisting my vices hour after hour, she had built an internal structure where destructive impulses simply found no fertile ground to grow. It wasn't repression. Repression creates pressure, and pressure eventually explodes. It was something far more sophisticated and profound. It was the absence of the battlefield itself. The enemy wasn't being fought. It simply had nowhere to exist within the architecture of the life she had meticulously constructed since childhood. Observing the routine of a traditional geisha is to witness something our modern culture has completely lost: the art of invisible structure. Mineko woke up at the same time every day, not out of motivational discipline or heroic willpower, but because rhythm was incorporated into her body like breathing. Each part of the day had its specific purpose and corresponding ritual: the precisely prepared morning tea, the shamisen practice at fixed times, the dance exercises that took place regardless of motivation or mood. There was no room for internal negotiation, that exhausting mental dialogue of should I or shouldn't I that consumed me daily. Structure eliminated the need to decide, and without constant decisions, there was no opportunity for destructive impulses to hijack the decision-making process. What fascinated me most was that this fierce discipline didn't create rigidity or inner death. On the contrary, it created genuine freedom. Mineko was famous for her vibrant artistic expression, her magnetic presence, her ability to be completely present and alive in each performance. There was radiant joy in what she did, not the somber martyrdom I associated with self-discipline. This contradicted everything. Thought I knew. I believed that structure killed spontaneity, that discipline stifled life, that following strict rules inevitably led to a gray and lifeless existence. But observing Mineko, I realized the opposite was true. It was precisely the deep structure that unleashed her creative energy, because she didn't need to waste mental and emotional resources constantly deciding what to do or resisting destructive impulses. I began to understand that what I called discipline wasn't real. Discipline, it was merely temporary suppression sustained by finite willpower. True discipline, the kind Mineko embodied, didn't depend on daily motivation, didn't fluctuate with emotional states, didn't negotiate with excuses and rationalizations. It was a different operating system running in the background, as fundamental and automatic as the autonomic nervous system that keeps your heart beating without you having to think about it. When she taught me through her examples that the amateur practices until they get it right, the professional practices until they can't afford to fail, it finally clicked. She wasn't resisting vices because she had trained her entire life to build an identity where those vices were fundamentally incompatible with who she was. It wasn't a battle. It was an inner architecture so solid that certain things simply didn't fit in there anymore. Addiction is not born from habit. It is born from emptiness. I thought the problem was the behavior, pure and simple. For years, I focused all my energy on trying to modify external actions. Quitting smoking, quitting drinking, stopping procrastinating, stopping seeking easy dopamine on social media or pornography. It was as if I believed that the behaviors were the root of the problem, and if I could simply cut them off by force, everything would magically resolve itself. I created elaborate rules, reward and punishment systems, blocking apps, bets with friends, any external mechanism that promised to prevent me from performing the unwanted behavior. Each addiction was treated as an isolated technical problem that needed a corresponding technical solution, as if I were a defective machine that just needed some adjustments to the right components. But I realized that addiction always appears where there is unresolved inner silence, a void that screams to be filled with anything. The discovery came gradually, through painful observation of my own repetitive patterns. I noticed that my relapses were never random. They had specific and predictable emotional triggers. It wasn't simply seeing a cigarette or passing by a bar that defeated me. It was the feeling of inadequacy after criticism at work, the suffocating loneliness of an empty Sunday afternoon, the paralyzing anxiety about the future that woke me up at 3 a.m. The addictive behavior was merely the visible symptom, the desperate and maladaptive attempt to silence something much deeper that hurt inside me like an open wound that never fully healed. I began a radical experiment. Instead of focusing on the behavior, I started investigating the exact moment before the impulse arose. What was happening inside me in the 5 minutes before reaching for the cigarette? What was the emotional taste of that moment? What was I avoiding feeling? What internal conversation was I trying not to have with myself? The answers were devastating in their simplicity and consistency. I was always running away from some form of emotional discomfort that seemed unbearable, existential boredom that made me question the meaning of everything, shame at not being who I had promised myself to become, fear that I was fundamentally inadequate and that people would find out, repressed anger that I wasn't allowed to express. The addiction was the anesthetic I desperately applied to these open emotional wounds. Mineko taught something that finally made sense in this context. Ikigai wo mitsukeru, find your purpose. It wasn't superficial motivational advice. It was a profound structural principle about how human beings function. A geisha didn't need vices because her life had such a clear purpose, such a meaningful structure, and such a cultivated presence that there simply wasn't an existential void begging to be filled with destructive behaviors. Every moment of the day had meaning, every action had intention, every ritual connected her to something greater than herself. There weren't those black holes of empty. Time where the mind wanders to dangerous territories, where boredom turns into anxiety, where a lack of direction invites self-destructive impulses to take over and offer temporary relief. I then realized with painful clarity, I didn't have an addiction problem. I had an emptiness problem disguised as an addiction problem. My life was structurally devoid of deep purpose, meaningful rituals, genuine connections, and mindful presence. I would wake up for no clear reason other than to survive. Another day, work on things that didn't resonate with anything deep within me, and return home to fill the time until I could sleep again. The addictions weren't external invaders. They were guests I had invited myself, offering to fill the void I didn't know how to healthily fill. Trying to remove them without first addressing the void was like emptying water from a leaky boat without repairing the hole. No matter how many times you empty it, the water always comes back because the fundamental structure is compromised. The silent routine that cuts addiction off at the root. I learned that Japanese discipline isn't about dramatic intensity or heroic effort. It's about clean, almost invisible repetition. This was revolutionary for someone like me, who had been conditioned by Western culture to believe that real change required grand gestures, radical overnight transformations, public declarations of total commitment. I always imagined discipline as something spectacular. Waking up at 4 a.m. to train intensely, fasting for hours, meditating for hours, eliminating everything at once in a dramatic purge. The discipline Mineko practiced was the exact opposite. It was so subtle and consistent that it became practically invisible, like the silent work of a tree's roots that no one sees, but that support the entire structure. It wasn't explosive changes that impressed observers. It was microscopic adjustments repeated thousands of times until they became the very texture of daily existence. When the day is structured with precision and intention, addiction literally loses physical and temporal space to exist. This wasn't abstract theory. I tested it in practice, and the results were undeniable. I started building a fixed morning routine, waking up at the same time, preparing green tea following a specific ritual, sitting in silence for 15 minutes, just observing my breathing, taking a cold shower of exactly 3 minutes, getting dressed in a specific order. It seemed obsessive and even ridiculous at first, but something profound was happening. These rituals filled the first 2 hours of the day, precisely the hours when my willpower was weakest and my addictions usually ambushed me. There was no free time where my mind could wander into dangerous territories, no decisions to make that could be hijacked by impulses, no emptiness waiting to be filled with destructive behaviors. The secret lay not in the difficulty of the actions, but in their unwavering consistency and the meaning invested in them. A geisha doesn't practice shamisen for 3 hours straight once a week when she's motivated. She practices 45 minutes every day at the same time, regardless of weather, mood, or circumstances. This regularity creates something that willpower never achieves: genuine automaticity. After 3 weeks of doing the exact same morning sequence, my body began to automatically switch to automatic mode. After 3 months, trying to skip a step in, the routine caused more discomfort than simply performing it. The brain had rewired the neural circuits. The path of healthy routine had become the route of least resistance, while the path of addiction now required conscious effort to access, completely reversing the previous dynamic. But there was something even deeper happening beyond the mere formation of mechanical habits. Each ritual, when performed with full presence and conscious intention, became an act of self-respect, a silent declaration of identity. When I prepared the tea with total attention, watching the water boil, feeling the steam, moving deliberately, I wasn't just making tea. I was telling myself, I am the kind of person who deserves this moment of care and presence. When I sat in silence, breathing consciously, instead of immediately reaching for my phone, I was reinforcing, I am someone who can be with myself without needing constant distraction. Each repetition was like a vote of confidence deposited into the bank account of my own identity, accumulating compound interest over the months until I looked in the mirror and saw someone fundamentally different looking back. Routine also created something I hadn't expected: comforting predictability in a chaotic and uncontrollable world. One of the reasons I sought out vices was to create a sense of control when everything else seemed to be falling apart. At least I could control when and how I would numb myself. But a structured routine offered genuine control without the destructive costs. No matter how chaotic the outside world became, I knew exactly how my first 120 minutes of the day would unfold. This island of predictability became my sanctuary, my fixed point of reference. And most fascinatingly, the stronger my morning routine became, the more it positively influenced the rest of the day, like a stone thrown into water, creating ripples that expand into ever-widening circles. It started with 2 structured hours. In 6 months, my entire day had gained architecture and intention, and vices had simply been architected out of existence, not by force, but by a lack of space where they could exist. Why willpower fails and presence doesn't. I was always told to be strong, to have more willpower, to simply decide and move forward. The entire cultural narrative around me revolved around this idea that if you failed to overcome an addiction, it was because you weren't strong enough, determined enough, disciplined enough. Self-help books screamed, "Have more willpower." Motivational videos showed people waking up at 4 a.m., sweating in gyms. Gurus promised that all you had to do was really want it to achieve anything. I bought into this narrative completely, internalizing the belief that my repeated failures were simply evidence of weakness of character, that I needed to try harder, clench my teeth tighter, resist with more determination. Each relapse became not only a practical defeat, but a painful confirmation that I was fundamentally weak and inadequate as a human being. But Mineko taught something far more effective and profoundly different: being present before desire arises, inhabiting the moment with full awareness. This sounded mystical and abstract when I first heard it, but when I began to practice, the difference became crystal clear. Willpower operates like this. Desire arises with full force, and you try to build a barrier against it using pure mental determination, like holding a door closed while something violent tries to break it down from the other side. It's a direct, face-to-face battle, you against the impulse. And battles like that are exhausting. You may win some, perhaps many, but eventually fatigue wins and the door gives way. Mindful presence operates radically differently. You inhabit the present moment with full attention before desire has a chance to fully form, observing the first signs with detached curiosity instead of panic and resistance. The practical difference was revolutionary when I started applying it consistently. Before, when the urge to smoke arose, it arrived like a giant wave ready to engulf me. A practically irresistible impulse that took over my entire field of consciousness, screaming for immediate gratification. My only option was to try to resist with brute force while the wave violently pushed me. But when I learned to be present and attentive throughout the day, I began to notice the signs much earlier. The slight tension in my shoulders, the almost imperceptible tightness in my chest, the subtle thought of something is missing, the restlessness in my hands. These were the first signs, small ripples on the surface of the water long before the wave formed. And at this initial stage, when it was just a ripple, I could simply observe with curiosity. Ah, look, the pattern is starting again. Interesting. What's really going on here? Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day like a cell phone battery. Scientists call this decision fatigue or ego depletion. Every time you resist an impulse using brute willpower, you expend a measurable amount of this limited resource. This is why most relapses happen at night, when you've already spent all your willpower in 1,000 small resistances throughout the day and there's simply nothing left in the tank. At 7 a.m., you're full of determination. At 10 p.m., you're empty and vulnerable, and that's exactly when the impulse attacks, with full force knowing you're defenseless. Mindfulness, on the other hand, doesn't deplete. In fact, the more you practice it throughout the day, the stronger it becomes, the exact opposite of willpower. It's like developing an observation muscle that gets stronger with use, not weaker. Mineko described this through the metaphor of the samurai. The mediocre warrior reacts to the attack. The master warrior anticipates and positions himself where the attack cannot reach him. It's not about having faster reflexes or superior strength. It's about awareness so refined that you perceive the opponent's intentions before they even move, allowing you to simply not be there when the blow arrives. Applied to addictions, this meant don't wait for the craving to explode in full force and then try to heroically combat it. Cultivate continuous presence that detects emotional and situational triggers long beforehand, allowing you to consciously position yourself where the impulse has no power. When I realized I was feeling inadequate after a meeting, trigger identified, I could consciously take a 10-minute mindful breathing walk, processing the emotion directly, instead of suppressing it until it exploded later as a craving to smoke. Presence didn't win the addiction in direct battle. It dissolved the conditions necessary for the addiction to gain strength in the first place. the moment when addiction loses its power over you. There comes a point where the urge still appears, regularly as it always had for years. There was no magical moment of complete healing where the desire simply vanished forever like smoke in the air. I still felt the familiar trigger, that tightness in my chest, that quick, seductive thought of, just once won't make a difference. That physical sensation of something missing that urgently needed to be filled. The urge remained part of my nervous system, deeply ingrained in the neural circuits by years of repetition. The fundamental difference wasn't that the urge had magically disappeared because I had become some kind of enlightened superhuman. The difference was that now there was conscious space around it, an observing presence that could witness it without being completely consumed or controlled by it. But it no longer controls who I am or what I do. And there, I understood. The addiction wasn't defeated in a glorious battle. It was overcome through transcendence. It was like watching clouds pass in the sky. They keep passing, some dark and threatening, but you're no longer pulled upwards with them. Before, when the impulse arose, it was as if I were instantly kidnapped. My entire consciousness was invaded and taken over by the desire. There was no I separate from the impulse. We were one and the same. Now there was a subtle but absolutely crucial distance. I could feel the impulse arising and simultaneously observe, there's that old pattern again, trying to assert itself. The difference between I am the desire and I observe the desire seems small in words, but in lived experience, it's the difference between slavery and freedom. The exact moment I noticed this shift was almost anticlimactic in its subtlety. I was sitting at home on a Saturday afternoon, that kind of empty afternoon that used to be my biggest trigger. No structure, no obligations, just empty time stretching dangerously. The impulse came, as it always did, bringing with it all the sensory memory of temporary pleasure, all the promise of immediate relief from restlessness. But this time, instead of the usual panic of, oh no, I need to resist with all my might, there was only a calm observation. Interesting. The pattern has emerged again. And then I simply continued sitting, breathing consciously, observing the impulse like a wave that rises, peaks, and naturally begins to descend. 10 minutes later, the impulse had completely passed, and I hadn't even fought against it. I just observed it exist and let it pass. Like watching the rain through the window without having to go out and try to stop it with your hands. Mineko had said something years before that only now made complete sense in direct experience. Maturity isn't about never feeling the wrong impulse. It's about knowing you don't have to obey every impulse you feel. A geisha in training feels tired, feels the urge to give up, feels the temptation to skip practice. But she doesn't act on those feelings because her identity is anchored in something deeper than momentary impulses. It's not violent repression. It's simply the recognition that feelings and impulses are temporary visitors, not permanent commanders. You can feel something intensely and still consciously choose not to act on that feeling. This capacity to have the impulse without being the impulse, to feel the desire without being enslaved by the desire, was what I had finally developed through months of patient practice and consistent structure. True freedom is not the absence of temptation. It is the presence of conscious choice in the face of it. Today, when the impulse arises, I no longer feel that old terror of, I'm going to lose control, or that desperate need to resist with all my might. There is only a quiet recognition. You again. I know exactly what you are. I know where you come from. I know the void you're trying to fill. And I choose not to follow you today. And then the impulse, realizing it no longer has power here that it doesn't find, the fertile ground of identification it used to find, simply dissolves like mist under the sun. The addiction still exists somewhere in my nervous system, etched by years of repetition, but I am no longer that person who needs to obey. This is the genuine overcoming that Mineko taught, not destroying the enemy in epic battle, but transcending the entire battlefield until there is no more war, only conscious peace and sovereign choice. If this journey resonated with you, leave a comment below. What addiction are you ready to overcome, not conquer? Let's create a space where we can share this transformation together. And if you want to continue exploring the path of invisible discipline that liberates instead of imprisoning, subscribe to the Geisha Path channel. Here, every week we explore how Japanese wisdom can transform addictions into freedom, chaos into clarity, and struggle into transcendence. See you in the next video.